The walls of the congressional hearing room pulsed with unspoken tension, like a bomb ticking quietly beneath marble and microphones. Rows of reporters, analysts, and interns filled every available space, eyes fixed on the panel above. Behind the nameplates, behind the rehearsed posture, something raw was simmering. The hearing had been billed as a review of tech regulation, but the undercurrent was political theater. And today's scene had a new lead. Jasmine Crockett sat with poise that only courtroom survivors carry, not performative stillness, but the kind that's earned after years of being underestimated. She didn't fidget. She didn't blink. Her pen rested idle on the notepad in front of her, already full of legal shorthand, precedent codes, and quotes she planned to return like thrown knives. Across from her, Ted Cruz leaned in, a smirk twitching at the edge of his mouth like a man too eager for his own punchline. The committee chair's voice rang out. "Senator Cruz, you have 5 minutes." He didn't need 5. He wanted 2. Just enough to provoke, to bait, to dominate the news cycle, and Jasmine knew it. She'd seen men like him take the long way around an argument just to land on a woman's name. Cruz began with a monologue disguised as questioning, rhetorical traps laid beneath concern for free speech and big tech censorship. He invoked the radical left, Twitter's bias, Hunter Biden, and cultural Marxism within the first 60 seconds. The room shifted. Even the witnesses, 3 tech CEOs and a constitutional law professor, knew this wasn't about policy, it was about performance. And then, he looked directly at her. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, like a hunter speaking to a deer. "You've made statements suggesting tech companies should silence certain voices, voices you simply disagree with. Do you believe in the First Amendment? Or just your own opinion?" There it was. Cameras swiveled. Staffers stopped typing. She didn't flinch. She clicked her pen once, calm, final. Her voice came measured but firm. "Senator Cruz, with all due respect, your selective outrage is as loud as your silence was on January 6th. The air left the room. Audible gasps erupted from the gallery. He blinked. Just once. And for a brief second, something in his face, a muscle in his jaw, or the corner of his lip, flinched. The chair struck the gavel lightly. "Order." But the moment was already out of their hands. Jasmine leaned forward, voice low, deliberate. "I believe in the First Amendment. I also believe in accountability. You speak of silencing voices, but what about platforms profiting from lies that led to an insurrection? What about disinformation campaigns that target voters who look like me?" Cruz opened his mouth, but no sound came. She wasn't done. "You ask if I believe in free speech. I do. But I also believe in the consequences of speech, especially when it costs lives." Her words didn't rise in volume, they rose in weight. And Cruz sat back. No quip, no rebuttal. The court reporter's fingers slowed, unsure if she was still recording a debate or a reckoning. Jasmine folded her notes closed. The gallery was silent. The moment was hers, and the headlines were already writing themselves. The agenda, printed neatly across each desk placard, read, "Oversight hearing on tech platform responsibility and democratic discourse." But everyone in the room knew that wasn't the real subject. Not today. The hearing had barely started before the tone shifted. What was meant to be a bipartisan review of algorithmic bias, misinformation control, and data transparency had become something else entirely. A political battleground dressed in procedure. It wasn't just about platforms anymore. It was about who controlled the story. Ted Cruz had shown up with talking points, not questions. He wasn't there to listen to testimony. He was there to perform for the cameras. He interrupted the chair before roll call had finished. He demanded additional time before the first witness had spoken. His voice carried more venom than inquiry, more posturing than principle. Jasmine Crockett sat unmoved, watching it all unfold like a seasoned defense attorney at a rookie's opening statement. She scribbled a few words in her notebook, not in reaction, but in preparation, because she'd seen the playbook before: shift the conversation, name the enemy, and when possible, make the woman the target. And then it came. Cruz turned his fire directly at her. "I find it ironic," he said, "that some of my colleagues claim to champion democracy while simultaneously pushing tech companies to suppress conservative voices." He looked directly at Jasmine. "Congresswoman Crockett has called for regulation that borders on censorship. If we're going to question platforms for bias, let's start with the political pressure they receive from the far left." The accusation wasn't subtle. It was surgical. The room bristled. Some leaned back in surprise. Others leaned forward in anticipation. Jasmine didn't respond. Not yet. She let the silence linger, let it stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable, and that silence said more than any rebuttal could have. Because everyone in that room, from the witnesses to the stenographer, could see what was happening. This wasn't about tech policy. This was about power. Who holds it, who challenges it, and who refuses to be quiet when men like Ted Cruz try to wield it unchecked. Jasmine inhaled slowly, eyes steady, fingers folded calmly atop her notes. Let him finish, she thought. Let him dig. He just gave her the mic. And she already knew how this ended. Jasmine didn't say it for permission. The chair glanced toward her, ready to redirect the floor, but she was already speaking, calmly, deliberately, with a rhythm that cut through the tension like a scalpel through gauze. "I appreciate the senator's concern for free speech," she began, her tone surgical. "But what I don't appreciate is the rewriting of history in real time." She flipped open her folder and slid a page toward the microphone, a printed transcript highlighted in red. "This is from your own words, Senator. November 17th, 2020. You accused Twitter of being biased after they flagged false information about election fraud, and yet just weeks later, you told the American people that the platform had every right to moderate content." She paused, letting the inconsistency hang. "That's not free speech. That's selective outrage." Ted Cruz leaned forward, ready to interrupt, but Jasmine was faster. "You want to talk about censorship? Let's talk about how misinformation about vaccines, much of it spread by verified accounts you supported, led to thousands of unnecessary deaths." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You've made yourself a defender of free expression, but only when that expression serves your narrative." She reached for another page, another quote, this time from a press release. Cruz praising a tech company for removing ISIS propaganda. "I assume that wasn't censorship? Or does your version of the First Amendment only protect your voters?" Cruz laughed quietly, that smug, performative scoff, but Jasmine didn't look up. Instead, she delivered the line that cracked the air open like thunder. "You speak of silencing voices, but where was your outrage when Alex Jones profited from the deaths of school children?" Silence. Not from Cruz, from the room. Even the stenographer paused, her fingers suspended mid-keystroke. Crockett leaned, back slightly, voice low. "This isn't about tech, it's about truth. And your war isn't with these companies, it's with accountability." The senator blinked, visibly rattled. His smirk faltered. The senator blinked, visibly rattled. His smirk faltered, and that was the first time he looked small. The committee chair cleared his throat. "Order, please." But no one moved. Jasmine folded her notes neatly. "He came to debate," she thought. "I came to cross-examine." And the court of public opinion was already deliberating. Jasmine didn't look at Cruz when she began speaking again. She looked past him, into the gallery, into the lens of every camera capturing her every word. Her voice softened, but it carried heavier than before, like a eulogy delivered in a courtroom. "I grew up in Texas," she said, "in a neighborhood where voting was a privilege you had to fight for, not a right that showed up in the mail." She paused, letting her own memory pull the weight of the moment. "My grandfather was born in a time when men who looked like him were addressed as boy by judges and lawmakers. He never saw the inside of a courtroom that treated him with dignity." Her hands rested on the table, fingers splayed as if bracing against something unseen. "When I walked into this chamber," she continued, her tone firming, I did so not just for my district, but for every generation that came before me and was told to wait their turn, to stay quiet, to survive. She turned to Cruz now, slowly, eyes unwavering. So when you sit there and suggest that I'm an enemy of the Constitution because I ask questions about disinformation, don't pretend you don't know what that implies. You've studied the same history I have. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't flinch. You call this a political stunt, but for people like me, this chamber is the closest thing we've ever had to justice. The gallery was silent again. Even the usual murmurs from the staff tables ceased. She glanced at her notes, but didn't need them. Because it's not just misinformation that harms. It's indifference. It's allowing lies to circulate while calling them opinions. It's watching black communities be silenced and calling it preserving tradition. She folded her hands together. You see outrage, I see obligation. Cruz opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words didn't come, or maybe he knew they wouldn't land. Jasmine looked away from him. She had made her point, not just legally, but generationally. The hearing had started as a platform policy debate, but it had just become a reckoning. Jasmine opened the next tab in her binder, her fingers moving with the precision of someone not just confident, but prepared. Every page was a trap, every citation a nail. You talk about the First Amendment, she said calmly, but let's examine how consistently you apply it. She turned a document toward the committee, lifting it slightly for the cameras. This is a transcript from a Judiciary Committee hearing 2 years ago. You argued then that government has no role in compelling platforms to host certain speech. That was your position, until conservative voices faced moderation. The words echoed in the room like a prosecutor laying out motive and means. She pulled another page free, this time quoting Cruz directly. In 2019 you said, and I quote, "Private companies have the right to moderate content according to their values. Yet here you are condemning that exact right as anti-American when it no longer benefits your narrative." Cruz leaned in, clearly agitated. "Are you accusing me of—" But Jasmine didn't break stride. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Senator. I'm quoting you." A beat of silence. She lifted a tweet printed in high contrast, the bold blue check mark visible even from the gallery. "This is yours. January 7th, 2021. You called the riot at the Capitol a despicable act of lawlessness. But days before that, you fueled the conspiracy that brought those people to that door." The room bristled. Cruz's hand clenched on the desk. He spoke, voice low and tight. "You're taking that out of context." She didn't smile, didn't blink. "No, Senator. You're just hoping no one reads the full one." A ripple ran through the spectators, even the tech CEOs, until now quiet and motionless, exchanged glances. Jasmine turned back to the committee. This isn't about free speech. It's about power, and how quickly some are willing to sacrifice principle when it's no longer useful. Cruz stared straight ahead, visibly rattled. The courtroom had turned into a mirror, and he didn't like what he saw reflected. Cruz's posture shifted, subtly at first, a tighter grip on his pen, shoulders drawn higher. The calm mask of senatorial decorum was cracking, and everyone could see it. "Don't lecture me, Congresswoman," he said, each word a clenched jaw. The room stirred. The chair raised a brow but didn't intervene. It was too late for neutrality. Jasmine didn't flinch. She rested her hand lightly on the table, voice even. "I'm not lecturing. I'm citing facts." Cruz pushed forward, louder now. "You're grandstanding. You want your viral moment, I get it. But this is a policy hearing, not a soapbox for political stunts." The insult was thinly veiled and utterly transparent. Jasmine tilted her head, her voice soft enough to make everyone lean in. "I'm sorry. Are you describing this moment or your last 5 years on cable news?" A low oof escaped from somewhere in the gallery. Even a few aides behind the dais shifted uncomfortably. Cruz scoffed. "You think sarcasm wins arguments?" "No," she said, "but hypocrisy loses them." He slammed his pen down, louder than necessary, trying to regain the upper hand. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Where was your concern when your party pressured platforms to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story? She met his gaze, not defiant, just unwavering. I was concerned about protecting voters from propaganda, the same way I was concerned when platforms let COVID lies kill thousands of Americans. Cruz's voice cracked with frustration. You don't get to define what's truth and what's propaganda. No, Senator, she replied, but evidence does, data does, lives do. The chair struck the gavel once. Order. Let's keep this respectful. But respect had already left the building, replaced by something far more electric. Truth, spoken plainly, without fear. Jasmine leaned back slightly, calm amid the storm. You may have the floor, she said quietly, but I have the facts. And for a second, Cruz had nothing to say. Not because he was done, but because he'd been disarmed. The chair cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the room. Let's return to the witnesses, he said, gesturing toward the first tech executive seated at the long table. A man in his 40s, CEO of one of the largest social platforms in the country, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. The tension hadn't escaped him. His hands were steady, but his voice was careful. We've received inquiries and pressure from both Democratic and Republican offices, he said. However, the nature of those interactions varies. Jasmine didn't speak. She let the witness unravel the thread. The CEO glanced down at a document before continuing. For example, Representative Crockett's office submitted requests for transparency, asking for clarification on algorithmic moderation and recommending we disclose our internal metrics. He paused. By contrast, Senator Cruz's office asked for direct intervention, removal of content and disciplinary action against specific users. A ripple of gasps ran through the gallery. Staffers whispered. Even the stenographer glanced up. Cruz sat forward. That's a gross mischaracterization. But the CEO held firm. We have the emails on file, Senator. I'm happy to submit them to the committee. Crockett remained still, her expression unreadable. The second witness, an executive from a rival platform, chimed in. We were also asked by Senator Cruz's team to suppress what they called anti-patriotic content in the weeks following January 6th. Another wave of murmurs. The chairman struck the gavel again, but the air was shifting, decisively. The law professor on the witness panel, who had remained silent until now, raised her voice. Congresswoman Crockett's concerns about algorithmic bias fall squarely within the boundaries of constitutional review and democratic oversight. What's being described on the other side, if verified, veers toward inappropriate political coercion. Jasmine finally spoke again, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. I've never asked any platform to silence anyone. I've asked them to be honest about who's speaking and who's paying for the microphone. Cruz's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. The witnesses had spoken, and the tide was turning. The committee chair asked if there were any final clarifying questions before the panel moved to closing remarks. Jasmine raised her hand, not rushed, not showy, just methodical. I'd like to enter a document into the record, she said, flipping to a page near the back of her binder. There was a quiet anticipation now, an almost courtroom hush, as if the room itself knew what was coming. This is a redacted email from Senator Cruz's communications director, she said, sliding the printed copy into the evidence folder and holding up a duplicate for the press pool cameras. It was verified by Platform Counsel and authenticated by our committee's investigative team. She didn't have to read the whole thing, just one line. We recommend immediate removal of the content, targeting the senator's stance on COVID response. Flag it as disinformation if necessary. It wasn't speculation. It was a directive, and it was dated 3 weeks before Cruz had appeared on national television accusing social media companies of political bias for moderating conservative content. Crockett didn't smile. She didn't even raise her voice. You claim to be a guardian of the First Amendment, she said, eyes locked on him. But your own office asked a private company to silence political criticism, not because it was false, but because it was inconvenient. Cruz leaned forward, voice strained. That's taken out of context. But Crockett's tone cut through the room like the swing of a judge's gavel. No, Senator. This is the context. You weaponize speech when it serves you, and suppress it when it doesn't. Aides in the background whispered urgently to each other. Reporters typed with the frantic pace of breaking news. Jasmine turned back to the chair. I move to have the email and supporting verification entered into official committee record. The chair nodded slowly. So ordered. The moment landed like thunder, not because she shouted, but because she didn't have to. The committee chair adjusted his glasses, attempting to restore a semblance of decorum. The motion to subpoena internal communications from tech platforms and political offices, including Senator Cruz's, has been put to a vote. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. The air was thick, the tension palpable. One by one, members raised their hands. The votes were counted. The majority stood behind the motion, signaling a rare moment of bipartisan agreement, or perhaps a recognition of undeniable evidence. The chair's gavel came down firmly. Motion passed. The room erupted, quietly but noticeably. Some members exchanged approving nods. Journalists glanced at one another, already composing their headlines in their minds. Jasmine Crockett sat back with a subtle nod, expression composed but resolute. There was no celebration in her demeanor, only the quiet satisfaction of a battle well fought.
Guide.
Across the table, Ted Cruz gathered his papers with deliberate slowness, face unreadable. The defiant energy he carried at the beginning of the hearing had dissolved into something more muted. Disbelief, maybe even resignation. The gallery whispered, cameras clicked, and the public record was made. For Jasmine, this wasn't the end. It was another step toward accountability. For Cruz, it was a rare moment in which the spotlight had turned, and it illuminated cracks he could no longer hide. The hearing adjourned with an unspoken understanding. This chapter was closed, but the story was far from over. Outside, reporters began to crowd the halls, their phones alive with the viral clip of Jasmine Crockett's sharp rebuttal and the senator's stunned silence. Inside, the courtroom had witnessed something rare, a moment when truth found its voice and held the powerful to account. And the nation was watching. Minutes after the hearing ended, the clip was everywhere. Twitter feeds, TikTok loops, news tickers scrolling across cable channels. Jasmine Crockett's poised dismantling of Ted Cruz wasn't just a political moment, it was a cultural one. Viewers watched as Cruz's confident smirk faded into stunned silence, his eyes flickering with a mix of disbelief and calculation. The cameras captured every nuance, the slight tap of his pen, the frozen stillness in his posture. It was the reaction that stopped the court cold. Political commentators dissected the exchange with feverish intensity. Conservative pundits attempted to spin it as a gotcha moment gone wrong, while progressive voices hailed it as a much-needed reckoning. Jasmine, meanwhile, maintained her composure. She wasn't interested in viral fame. She was there to fight a fight much bigger than headlines. Her phone buzzed, messages of support, screenshots of the clip, news outlets requesting interviews, but she remained. Ned focused on the work ahead. Behind closed doors, Cruz's team convened in crisis mode. The senator's carefully crafted narrative had unraveled under the weight of his own words and actions. His office faced mounting calls for transparency, questions that wouldn't fade. The political landscape had shifted in those few minutes, subtly but irrevocably. For Crockett, it was proof that preparation, courage, and unyielding truth could break through even the most fortified defenses. She had shut him down in seconds. But more importantly, she had spoken for countless voices silenced by hypocrisy and selective outrage. And in that silence that followed her words, the court and the country felt something new, a glimpse of justice. The gavel might have fallen, but the conversation was just beginning.